3 days before my son's retirement party. I walked into Magnolia Hair Studio the way I had every 6 weeks for the past 12 years. The bell above the door chimed. Sandra Kowalski, the owner, looked up from behind the reception desk. The moment she saw me, something shifted in her face. She crossed the salon in 4 steps, took my arm gently, and said in a voice just above a whisper, "Don't check in. Don't say your name. Come with me right now." I had known Sandra since she cut my hair before my husband's funeral. She was not a dramatic woman. She did not whisper without reason. I followed her. She led me past the shampoo stations and through a door marked "Staff Only" into a small break room with a folding table and 2 chairs. She turned off the light. The room went dark, except for the thin line of gold coming under the door. "Sandra, what is happening?" She pressed one finger to her lips. Then she pointed at the wall. Voice. Clear enough, coming from the private styling room next door, the one she reserved for VIP clients. A man's voice, smooth and practiced. "The notary is confirmed for Sunday. She'll sign after the dinner toast. She trusts you completely. That's the entire point." I stopped breathing. A woman's voice, younger, hesitant. "And the memory documentation? Is that solid?" The man again. "Philip has filed 3 assessments over the past 4 months. The pattern is established. Once the trust amendment executes, we move everything into Hartwell Capital within 72 hours. I knew that voice. My son's business partner, Marcus Webb, then my son's voice, Daniel. "And she won't be able to contest it?" "Not if Philip's assessment is on record first. Diminished capacity? It's clean? It's legal? It's done." A chair scraped. Footsteps. A door clicked shut. Sandra turned on the light. Her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They come here every Thursday." Marcus's book's the private room. I didn't know what they were planning until last week. I didn't know how to call you. I didn't know if you'd believe me. I looked at her. This woman who had held my hand when I couldn't stop crying 6 years ago. This woman who knew my whole life in the way only hairdressers do. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 2 months," she said. "Probably more." I picked up my purse from the floor where I'd set it. I smoothed my jacket. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out exactly what I'm dealing with first." I walked out through the front door into the October morning. The street in Fairview looked the same as it always did. Maple trees burning orange and red. A woman pushing a stroller. 2 teenagers on bicycles. Everything looked normal. Everything was ordinary. I sat in my car for a long time. Marcus Webb, my son's business partner of 7 years, the man I had personally vouched for when Daniel wanted to bring him into Whitfield Architecture Group, the firm my late husband Robert had founded in 1989, and Daniel, my son. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there and let the truth settle over me the way cold water settles after something heavy has been dropped into it. He was going to let them take everything. I need to go back further, because this didn't start 3 days before the party. This started long before I was willing to see it. Robert Whitfield died 6 years ago this past August. A stroke at 64. He was playing golf. He was laughing at something his friend Charlie had said, and then he was gone. The doctors told me he didn't suffer. I have held on to that for 6 years. He left behind a healthy architecture firm, a home we'd lived in for 28 years, and a trust worth approximately $18 million. The Thomas Whitfield Memorial Trust, named for Robert's father, held the family investments, the property portfolio, and the stake in the firm. He left Daniel and me as co-trustees. I was 61 when Robert died. Everyone told me to step back. Let the professionals manage it. Let Daniel take the lead. He was 36 and capable. He had his father's instincts for design and, I believe then, his father's integrity. I didn't step back. I hired a financial advisor I trusted. I kept my seat on the board. I attended every quarterly review. I asked questions that sometimes made the men in the room visibly irritated. I didn't apologize for the questions. Daniel met Marcus Webb at a conference in Chicago in 2017. Marcus was a consultant, sharp and well-dressed, with a way of making everything sound simpler than it was. He had the kind of confidence that either meant competence or performance. I didn't trust him immediately, but Daniel did, completely, and that mattered to me. By 2018, Marcus was a partner. By 2020, small things began to shift. A client meeting I wasn't told about until afterward, a contract revision that bypassed my review. Daniel explaining gently that things moved faster now, that the firm needed to be more agile, that my involvement sometimes slowed decisions. I told him I was still a co-trustee. He said, "Of course, Mom, of course." In 2022, Marcus suggested I see Dr. Philip Hart, a cognitive specialist. He mentioned it casually over dinner, as if it were a kindness. He said Daniel had noticed some things, a repeated story at a board meeting, a missed appointment, small things, but worth checking. I remembered sitting at that dinner table with my fork in my hand and feeling something cold move through me. I went to see Dr. Hart because I was 67 and I was not afraid of the truth. He gave me a battery of tests over 2 appointments. His assessment: no cognitive impairment, normal age-related processing, sharp executive function. He sent the report to my regular physician. He sent a different version somewhere else. I didn't know that yet. Daniel started saying things like, "You've already handled so much, Mom," and "the firm is in good hands," and "why don't you enjoy this chapter?" I told him this chapter was fine. I was fine. And I believed, because I needed to believe, that my son was simply worried about me. I was wrong about that. The retirement party was Daniel's idea. He framed it as a celebration. 50 years of Whitfield Architecture Group, from Robert's first office in 1974 through its current form. A formal dinner at the Fairview Country Club. 120 guests. Clients, colleagues, board members, people who had known Robert, people who had watched me keep the firm standing after he died. And at the party, according to what I had just heard through a wall in Sandra's salon, I was going to be handed papers to sign. I was going to sign away everything Robert built. I sat in my car for 20 more minutes. Then I took out my phone and called my attorney. Catherine Briggs had been my attorney for 15 years. She handled Robert's estate. She handled the trust formation. She knew where every dollar lived. "I need to see you today," I said. "This evening, if possible." Her assistant called back within the hour. 6 o'clock. I drove home. My housekeeper, Frances, was watering the front garden when I pulled up. She was 60 years old, Filipino-American, had worked for us for 18 years. She looked up and waved. I waved back and went inside. I sat at Robert's desk in the study and opened my laptop. I typed Marcus Webb Hartwell Capital into the search bar. Hartwell Capital Partners LC, Delaware registered. Founded March 2024. One listed partner, Marcus A. Webb, 6 months old, built and waiting. I typed Dr. Philip Hart, Connecticut Medical Board. No disciplinary actions. Clean license. 14 years in practice. Nothing obviously wrong, which meant whatever was wrong was buried. I closed the laptop and called a number I hadn't used in 2 years. James Okafor had been a senior investigator at the Connecticut Attorney General's office for 22 years before he retired and opened a private practice. Robert had connected me with him in 2019 when we suspected a former project manager of embezzlement. James had been thorough, fast, and absolutely discreet. He answered on the second ring. "Margaret," he said, "it's been a while. It has. I need your help again. Tonight, if you can manage it. Tell me where." We met at the coffee shop on Birchwood Avenue at 7. James was 63, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses he always forgot were on top of his head. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. I told him everything. Sandra, the voices through the wall, Marcus Webb, Dr. Hart, the 72-hour transfer window, the party on Sunday. He wrote in a small notebook. No phone on the table. When I finished, he looked up. "Co-trustee status," he said. "That protects you significantly, but not completely if a cognitive assessment is on record." "I know. The Hartwell formation date. 6 months ago. That's when this started taking shape." He tapped his pen. "Your son. Do you think he's driving this or following it?" I looked at my coffee. I don't know yet. And that's the part I can't stop thinking about. James nodded. "That's honest." He flipped a page. "I'll need access to the trust documents, the firm's recent financials, and everything you have on Marcus Webb. Any irregularities in the past 18 months, anything that felt off at the time." "I have one more thing for you," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message I had received 3 weeks ago from our firm's senior accountant, Gwen Park. She had texted me asking if I had approved a consulting fee payment to an entity called Aldgate Advisory Group. $45,000. Single transaction. She said Daniel had signed off, but she wanted my confirmation since it was above her standard threshold. I had texted back, "I'll look into it." I never did. I had been distracted by the party planning. James stared at the screen. Aldgate Advisory Group. He wrote it down. "I'll start there." "When do you need answers?" "Sunday morning." "The party is 7 in the evening?" "That's 3 days." "I know." He stood, picked up his notebook, left the coffee untouched. "I'll call you tomorrow night." He paused at the door. "Margaret, be careful what you let Daniel see between now and Sunday. If he knows you know, they'll accelerate the timeline." I understood. I drove home in the dark. Frances had left dinner covered on the kitchen counter. I sat at the kitchen table and didn't eat. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator that had been there for 6 years. Robert and Daniel and me at Daniel's college graduation. Robert's hand on Daniel's shoulder. Both of them grinning. I thought about the night Daniel was born. I thought about the night Robert died. I thought about the 18 years in between that were supposed to be the story of a family. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Mom, can't wait for Sunday. This is going to be a beautiful night." I read it twice. I wrote back, "Me too, sweetheart." I added a heart. Then I set the phone face down and went upstairs. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling and let everything I had heard settle into facts. Not fears. Facts. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. James, Aldgate Advisory Group, registered to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. Beneficial owner, Marcus Webb. The $45,000 was a payment, not a consulting fee. I found 6 others in the past 14 months. Total extracted, $312,000. I sat up. "That's embezzlement," I typed. "That's a thread," he wrote back. "And it's not the worst one. I'll have the full picture tomorrow. Get some sleep. I did not get any sleep. James arrived at my home the following evening with 2 folders. My attorney, Catherine Briggs, was already seated in the study. Our firm's senior accountant, Gwen Park, sat beside her. Gwen had driven over the moment I called. Her voice tight and quiet, the voice of someone who had been waiting for permission to say what she already knew. James set the folders on Robert's desk and opened the first one. Marcus Webb, he said, is not who Daniel believes he is. He placed a printed document on the desk. The Yale credentials Marcus had provided in 2017 when Daniel introduced him as a potential partner. Undergraduate degree. Graduate degree, 7 years at a prestigious Boston firm. The undergraduate degree was real, James said. Everything else was fabricated. The room was quiet. He continued. Marcus Webb has a civil judgment against him from 2019. A former business partner in Hartford claimed Marcus diverted client funds during a joint venture. The partner settled out of court. Non-disclosure agreement, but the court filing is public record. Catherine leaned forward. How did this not surface in our background check? It surfaces if you know to look for it. He used a middle name variant on all post-2019 documents. Marcus A. Webb becomes M. Andrew Webb. Different enough to skip automated checks. Gwen spoke. The Aldgate payments. I should have pushed harder when I first saw them. I thought maybe it was a retainer I hadn't been looped in on. You reported it to me, I said. That was the right thing. She looked at the floor. James opened the second folder. Dr. Philip Hart. He slid a document across the desk. A printout from a medical malpractice database. 2021. A patient in Westport. 78-year-old woman. Early-stage memory concerns. Dr. Hart's assessment was submitted as evidence in a guardianship proceeding initiated by her adult son. The court granted the son limited guardianship. 3 months later, the woman's investment portfolio was liquidated. She was placed in a memory care facility. Her daughter, from a second marriage, contested it 18 months later. The case was sealed. Hart was never disciplined, James said, because the daughter's suit was settled privately and the patient passed away before the deposition. I closed my eyes. That woman could have been me by February. James continued. Hart received a payment of $60,000 in April 2024 from an account connected to Hartwell Capital. He placed another document on the desk. The transfer record. Catherine picked it up. She studied it. She looked at me over her glasses. This is elder financial abuse, she said quietly. Multiple counts, wire fraud, conspiracy. And the embezzlement from the firm is a separate criminal matter. What about Daniel? Gwen asked. I looked at Catherine. She folded her hands. That depends entirely on what he knew and when he knew it. If he was told this was estate planning, that's different from knowingly conspiring to defraud you. James looked at me steadily. I found one piece of information that may help answer that. He pulled out a single printed page. A text exchange between Daniel and Marcus, recovered from a cloud backup associated with a shared project account. Legal in this context since it's a firm account. He said it in front of me. I read it. Marcus, November 14th. Your mother is sharper than Hart's report suggests. We may need to move the timeline up. Daniel, November 15th. Give her the party. She's earned it. After Sunday, it won't matter. I set the page down. He knew, I said. James said nothing. I stood and walked to the window. The oak tree Robert planted when we bought this house was visible in the garden lights, bare now, its branches reaching in every direction. How much time do we have before the party? 31 hours, Catherine said. I turned around. Then let's use every one of them. Sunday arrived gray and cold. November in Connecticut. I woke before dawn, dressed carefully, and sat in Robert's study with a cup of coffee and the files spread across his desk. I reviewed everything one final time: the embezzlement records, the fabricated credentials, the payment to Hart, the text messages, Patricia Summers' sealed case from Westport. James had confirmed late Saturday night that Patricia Summers' daughter, now 56 and living in Vermont, was willing to speak. She would join by video. She had been waiting, she said, for 3 years for an opportunity like this. Catherine had filed a sealed emergency injunction with Judge Raymond Walsh that afternoon. All trust assets frozen pending fraud review. The injunction would activate at 9 o'clock Sunday evening. Gwen had quietly provided the firm's full financial records to the State Attorney General's investigative unit Friday morning. A preliminary review had already begun. 2 plainclothes officers from the Financial Crimes Unit would be present at the party as guests. James had their contact information. At 4 in the afternoon, I put on the navy dress I had originally bought for this evening. Robert had always liked me in navy. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I was 69 years old. I had buried my husband. I had held a firm together for 6 years alone. I had raised a son who looked at me across a table and decided I was worth more to him as a managed asset than as a mother. And I was still standing. Frances appeared in the doorway. She was dressed to come to the party, which I had insisted on. She looked at me for a moment. "You look like yourself," she said. I smiled. "That's enough." She hesitated. "Mrs. Whitfield, last month, when Marcus was here for dinner, he asked me questions about your schedule, whether you ever seemed confused, whether you wrote things down a lot." I looked at her. "I told him you were the sharpest person I knew," she said quietly. "I didn't know why he was asking, but I want you to know what I said." I crossed the room and hugged her. "It matters," I said. "It genuinely matters." We arrived at the Fairview Country Club at 6:30. 120 guests, candlelight and white linens, and a string quartet in the corner. 50 years of Whitfield architecture displayed on boards along the perimeter wall. Robert's first blueprints. The Hartford Museum project. The library renovation that won an award in 2001. Daniel was standing near the entrance. He looked handsome and easy, the way he always did in a room. He kissed my cheek. "You look beautiful, Mom." "Thank you, sweetheart." Marcus Webb arrived 20 minutes later. He shook my hand warmly. He said the firm looked forward to the next 50 years. He said Robert would have been proud. I smiled. I said, "I think you're right." I watched him move through the room. Charming, unhurried, working the crowd. A man who believed Sunday evening would end one way. At 7:30, I noticed a woman at table 9 I hadn't recognized. Mid-40s, composed, watching the room carefully. She caught my eye once and nodded slightly. One of the officers. At 8 o'clock, Daniel stood and tapped his glass. He gave a speech about the firm, about Robert, about me. He said I was the reason Whitfield architecture was still standing. He said I had sacrificed more than anyone would ever know. He raised his glass. Everyone applauded. I sat very still. At 8:20, the MC announced that the founder would say a few words. I stood. I picked up my prepared remarks from the table. I carried them to the podium. I set them down without looking at them. "Good evening." I looked out at the room. At colleagues who had known Robert, at clients who had trusted us, at my son, seated at the head table, his expression warm and expectant. 50 years is a long time. I smiled. Robert used to say that every building was a promise. You promise your client a structure that will hold. You promise the community something worth looking at. You promise yourself that the work means something beyond the paycheck. A few people nodded. Some smiled. He kept his promises, I said. Everyone. That was who he was. I paused. When Robert died, I had a choice. I could honor the promise of what he built by stepping back. Or I could honor it by staying present. I chose to stay present. Some people found that inconvenient. The room shifted slightly. A few puzzled looks. Daniel's expression remained steady, but I saw his hand move to the table. I have spent 6 years making sure that this firm remained what Robert intended it to be. A business built on integrity, on accuracy, on honoring the people who trust you with something important. I looked at Marcus Webb, which is why what I have to share with you tonight is not easy, but it is necessary. I nodded toward the back of the room. James Okafor, standing near the AV table, pressed a button. A screen lowered behind me. The first image appeared, a corporate filing document. Hartwell Capital Partners, LLC. Delaware registration. March 2024. Sole partner. Marcus A. Webb. Whispers began. Marcus Webb has been a partner at Whitfield Architecture Group for 7 years. In that time, he created a separate entity for the sole purpose of receiving assets transferred from this firm and from the Whitfield Family Trust. I clicked to the next slide. The Aldgate payment records. 7 transactions. $312,000. These payments were taken from Whitfield Architecture Group over 14 months. They were routed through a shell entity to an offshore account controlled by Marcus Webb. The room erupted. I raised my hand. Please. Silence settled. Our senior accountant, Gwen Park, raised a concern about these payments 3 weeks ago. She was right to do so. I should have acted immediately. I didn't. That is on me. I clicked to the next image, Marcus Webb's credentials document, and beside it, the public record of the 2019 civil judgment. The qualifications Marcus Webb presented to this firm in 2017 were partially fabricated. His stated graduate degree and prior employment record were constructed. He has a civil judgment against him in Hartford for diversion of client funds from a previous venture. Marcus stood. Catherine, this is... Sit down, Marcus. He stared at me. I held his gaze without moving. He sat. I continued. Marcus Webb needed money, not for the first time. The extraction from our firm bought him time, but it wasn't enough. His plan was larger. The next slide appeared. The Hartwell Capital Financial Summary. The Trust Structure Diagram. $18 million. The Whitfield Property Portfolio. The firm stake. This Sunday evening, I was intended to sign an amendment to the family trust that would have transferred full fiduciary control to a new management structure connected to Hartwell Capital. The amendment was buried in what was described to me as routine retirement planning paperwork. Murmurs moved through the room like a wave. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed documentation that I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. I clicked to the final section. Dr. Hart's name appeared on screen. Dr. Philip Hart is a licensed cognitive specialist in this state. Over the past 4 months, he submitted 5 assessments documenting what he described as my progressive cognitive decline. These assessments do not reflect reality. They were fabricated. They were submitted in exchange for payment. I let that sit. Dr. Hart has done this before. The screen changed. Patricia Summer, age 78, Westport, Connecticut, 2021. I explained what happened to her. I didn't read from notes. I had memorized it because I felt I owed her that. Then I said, her daughter, Linda Summer Hatch, is here with us tonight. The screen switched to a live video feed. A woman in her mid-50s, seated in what appeared to be a kitchen, steady-faced and composed. My mother spent the last 11 months of her life in a memory care facility she didn't need, Linda said. She was not declining. She was assessed by a doctor who was paid to say she was. I fought to get her out. By the time the court scheduled the hearing, she was gone. She looked directly into the camera. If this woman had not called me last week, I would not have known this man was still practicing. She paused. Don't let them do to you what they did to her. The screen went dark. The room was silent. I looked at my watch. 8:58. The trust amendment was designed to execute automatically at 9 o'clock this evening, I said, through a timed digital submission prepared by Hartwell Capital. In approximately 90 seconds, that transfer would have moved everything offshore. I looked at Catherine Briggs. She stood from table 6. Your Honor. Judge Raymond Walsh, 71, a retired Superior Court judge I had known for 20 years, rose from table 11. Catherine spoke clearly. The emergency injunction is now in effect. All Whitfield Trust assets are frozen pending full fraud review. On the screen behind me, a message appeared in clean white text. Transfer blocked. Court order in effect. The room erupted. Several people stood. Someone said something I couldn't hear. 4 people rose from different tables, not guests. The 2 officers from financial crimes and 2 additional officers who had entered through the side door. Marcus Webb was on his feet moving toward the exit. Mr. Webb! One of the officers stepped directly in front of him. Marcus Webb, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Marcus turned. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. He said nothing. The second officer crossed to where Dr. Hart sat at table 7. He had not moved. He was staring at his hands. Dr. Philip Hart, you are under arrest for fraud, falsification of medical records, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. Hart stood slowly. He didn't resist. He walked out with the officers without speaking. I watched them go. The room was still except for the sound of my son. Daniel's chair scraped back. He was standing. His face was white. Mom. I turned. He was looking at me the way I hadn't seen since he was 9 years old and had broken a window and couldn't decide whether to tell me. That look of someone who understood, finally, how serious things were. I didn't know it was everything, he said. His voice was low. Marcus told me it was a formality. He said you needed protection. He said Hart had real concerns and we needed to act before you made a decision that hurt the firm. I thought... He stopped. I thought I was protecting you. I looked at my son. This man who was half Robert's face and half something I recognized as my own stubbornness. This person I had loved since before he took his first breath. The text, Daniel, November 15th. After Sunday, it won't matter. He flinched, as if I had struck him. That was wrong, he said. I know that was wrong. I was angry. He pressed his hands against the table. I've watched you hold on to that firm for 6 years, and I kept waiting for you to let me lead it, and you never did. And Marcus kept saying... He stopped again. I kept my voice even. Marcus kept saying, I was the obstacle. Daniel looked at the floor. Yes. I stood at the podium in a room full of people who had known Robert, who had known me, who were now watching my son stand in the wreckage of a plan he had helped build. I thought about what I had read the night before in the case file about Patricia Summer. Her daughter had said, The worst part wasn't losing her. The worst part was that she died, not knowing whether her son had meant for it to happen. She never got to ask him. I stepped down from the podium. I walked across the room to Daniel. I stood in front of my son and I looked at him for a long moment. "This is not over between us," I said quietly. "But it's not over at all. Do you understand what I mean?" His jaw moved. His eyes filled. He nodded once. The guests began to leave at 10. Some stopped to speak to me. Others slipped out quietly, embarrassed. Gwen Park gripped my hand with both of hers and couldn't find words. 2 board members confirmed an emergency meeting for Tuesday morning. One of them, Arthur Benning, who had known Robert since college, put his hand on my shoulder and said simply, "He would have been proud of you tonight." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. By 11, the room held only a handful of people. Catherine, James, Gwen, Francis, and me. We sat at the head table, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had become something else entirely. James spoke first. "The AG's office will take over the Hartwell investigation tomorrow morning. The embezzlement case is solid. Between that and the Hart connection, you're looking at federal charges." Catherine set a folder on the table. "The injunction holds through the review period. Your trust assets are secure. We'll file for full dissolution of Hartwell Capital by end of week." Gwen looked at me. "I should have come to you sooner with the Aldgate concern." "You came to me," I said. "That's what mattered in the end." Frances had brought a thermos of tea from somewhere. She poured a cup and set it in front of me without a word. I held it with both hands. "What about Daniel?" Catherine asked carefully. I looked at the table. "He'll cooperate with the investigation fully. I'll see to that." He wasn't the architect of this. He was the door Marcus needed open. That distinction matters legally, and it matters to me. James looked at me steadily. "And personally?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about the text message. After Sunday, it won't matter. I thought about the 18 months of small erosions. The meetings I wasn't told about. The gentle suggestions to step back. The son who watched Marcus build a machine and chose not to look too closely at what it was for. I thought about Robert. About the photograph on the refrigerator. About the hand on the shoulder. "I'm furious," I said finally. "And I'm heartbroken. And those 2 things are going to have to live next to each other for a while." James nodded. Catherine closed her folder. Frances refilled my cup. 6 months passed. The maple trees outside came back into leaf, then turned again. Then were bare again. Time moves differently when you're rebuilding something. Marcus Webb was indicted on 9 counts in January. Wire fraud, embezzlement, elder financial abuse, fraudulent misrepresentation. Hartwell Capital was dissolved. The $312,000 extracted from the firm was recovered through asset seizure. Marcus's personal accounts were frozen pending the federal investigation. He had, it turned out, done a version of this before, a smaller scheme in 2016 against a widowed business owner in Providence. That case had never been prosecuted. The woman had accepted a private settlement rather than go through a trial. Her attorney reached out after the news coverage. She wanted to testify. She did. Marcus was sentenced in April, 7 years federal prison, minimum 3 before parole eligibility. Dr. Philip Hart surrendered his medical license in February before the board could revoke it. He was sentenced in March to 5 years state prison. The Connecticut Medical Board filed a formal report with the National Practitioner Database. Linda Summer Hatch attended the sentencing. She sat in the second row and she didn't look away. Daniel was not charged. The prosecutors found no evidence he had known the full scope of the plan. He had known enough to be ashamed of, and he was. He resigned from the firm in December and told me it was because he needed to understand what he had allowed himself to become. He said it in a letter. 4 handwritten pages. He didn't make excuses. He explained. There is a difference, and he understood that difference, which told me something. He wrote, I spent years wanting to step out of Dad's shadow. Marcus told me I was capable of running this firm better than it was being run. He told me you were holding it back. He told me that love and business were separate things, and that confusing them was my problem. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because it was easier than admitting I was jealous of a dead man and resenting a woman who had done nothing but hold everything together. I was wrong about all of it. I don't know if you can forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I want you to know that I see clearly now. I see what you built. I see what I almost let them take. I'm sorry, Mom. I read it 4 times. Whitfield Architecture stabilized quickly once the board understood the full picture. I promoted Gwen Park to Chief Financial Officer. I hired an outside managing partner, a woman named Diane Osei, who had run her own firm in Atlanta for 12 years. She was 54, methodical, and had absolutely no tolerance for financial irregularity. We added an independent audit committee and a mandatory review process for all inter-entity transactions above $10,000. By spring, 3 clients who had quietly pulled back during the uncertainty returned. Revenue was recovering. I underwent an independent cognitive evaluation in January. 2 days of testing at Yale. The neurologist, Dr. Angela Forsyth, was thorough, unhurried, and clear in her findings. She shook my hand at the end of the 2nd day. Your processing speed is in the 91st percentile for your age group, she said. Your executive function is exceptional. I've tested Fortune 500 executives 20 years younger who don't score this well. I thought I would feel vindicated. Mostly, I felt tired. I declined the media requests. There were several. I had nothing to say publicly that the court record didn't already say better. I had quiet dinners with Francis, with Catherine, with James. We talked about normal things. Books, gardens, the firm's new library project in New Haven that Robert had designed the first draft for in 1998 and that we were finally building. In March, a card arrived from Linda Summer Hatch in Vermont. She thanked me again. She said her mother's name was finally attached to something that mattered. She said she slept better now. I put the card on Robert's desk next to his photograph. Daniel moved to Portland. He took a position as a project architect at a smaller firm. He was starting over at 45, which is not easy for a man who believed he was already where he was supposed to be. He sent short emails every few weeks. Weather, work, nothing heavy. I wrote back. In April, the emails got longer. He told me he'd started seeing a therapist. He said the therapist had asked him when he had last felt proud of himself, and he had realized he couldn't answer. In May, he asked if he could call. We spoke for 40 minutes. He cried once, briefly, and apologized for it. I told him crying was not something to apologize for. We didn't fix everything in one phone call. We weren't supposed to. June came. One morning, I sat beneath the oak tree in the garden with my coffee. Robert had planted it the year Daniel was born. It was 45 years old and taller than the house. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'd like to come home for a weekend sometime this summer. Not for the firm, not for anything complicated. I just want to sit in that garden. I want to see the oak tree. I want to have a Sunday morning the way we used to. I held the phone for a while. I thought about everything I had been told to let go of over the past 6 years. The firm, the trust, the chair at the board table. My own competence? I thought about what I had chosen instead. I typed back. Come in July. I'll make the lemon cake your father always asked for. 3 dots appeared. Then, thank you. I'll be there. I set the phone on the garden table and looked up at the oak tree. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because I know I am not the only woman who has sat in a car after hearing something she was never meant to hear, and had to decide whether to fight or to go quietly into whatever was being planned for her. I fought. Not because I was certain I would win, because what Robert and I built together deserved someone who would fight for it. And because I looked at that word, diminished, the word they had chosen for me, and I knew it was the one word in the English language that had never once applied to me. If you are watching this and you are somewhere in that story, I want you to hear this. Your age is not a liability. Your experience is not a burden. And the people who need you to believe otherwise are always the ones who need something from you. Pay attention to the people who whisper. Sometimes they are the ones trying to save you. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this. If this story meant something to you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it with them. I'll be back soon with another story from this life I'm still very much living. This is Opal Revenge, and I'm grateful you're here.